I simply cannot believe how much potential is within this space, and yet these racial disparities still exist. So, for folks who are meeting you for the first time, talk to us about what drove you into the cannabis industry. What was your calling? What made you take your first puff into the space? How did you enter this space, and why?
Well, first puff was about 16 years old, but that's a whole nother conversation.
That is
Um,
not the puff I was talking about, ma'am.
actually, that kind of was the first puff because I have always preferred cannabis over alcohol, and growing up here in Colorado, it made sense to me that Colorado was the first state to legalize because cannabis has been a part of the makeup of Colorado for as long as I can remember, right? And it's never seemed, this is going to sound crazy to folks, it's never seemed criminal or illegal to me because honestly, growing up here in Colorado and the way that I grew up in Colorado, I didn't know anybody that got arrested for weed.
Huh.
We weren't afraid with the cops with it. I mean, we weren't, being blatant around cops with it, but the worst that would happen was cops would call your parents and take your bag.
Wow.
So a very different way of growing up than what was going on in our major cities, right?
Right.
Or our inner cities, which was shocking for me when I met my brother, and he had said that he had been arrested for 4.5 ounces of cannabis, and it eventually cost him 10 years of his life being in the
My
system.
God.
Four of
Mm.
those years, my brother was picking cotton in an institution in Texas to purchase his freedom.
My
So,
God.
my
Literally,
God.
like you're not being metaphorical there. You're literally talking about him being out in those fields picking cotton.
Oh, literally out in the field
13th
picking
Amendment,
cotton.
folks. 13th Amendment. Remember that little exception? That exception that says if you've been convicted of a crime, slavery is wholly an option for you.
Slavery.
That's where
Yeah.
we're at, folks.
That's
That's where we're at.
exactly where we're at. And look, you can go down to Texas. We went, my family lives in Yoakum, Texas, and we took a Winnebago down there and we're driving. And all of a sudden, I started seeing what looked like snow everywhere. I was like, what is all of this stuff? And my brother's like, you don't know what that is? I'm like, no, what is this? He goes, girl, I goes, look around, look out in the field. You
Mm,
look out in the field, all you see is inmates out there picking fucking cotton.
my God.
Excuse my language. I
Ooh.
don't have
Oh
any
no,
other, I don't have
nah.
any other
No,
feeling
they
for
was
that.
they was fucking picking fucking cotton. That's what was
That's
happening. My God. Goddamn, they was picking cotton.
And it was the first
Wow.
time I saw it. And at that point, I don't know, damn near 50. So I had never seen a cotton field with people actually picking cotton. But when you
Mm,
saw it and you saw all the inmates out there picking cotton, that's going on today, this morning, today
mm.
in Texas. But anyway, I mean, this is so to answer your question, this is what this is all about,
Yeah.
to the point to where your zip code determined whether you were going to be a cannabis entrepreneur or a cannabis felon. And that's what we saw with me and my brother in the same family in different zip codes.
Mm. One of the reasons why I wanted this segment years ago was because it didn't make sense to me that we had people who were creating business plans, multi-billion-dollar business plans, I think, potentially. If certainly multi-million at the time of creation, multi-billion now in terms of potential. But creating these very successful business plans in states where people were serving time picking cotton for having engaged in something related to the cannabis plant. It just didn't make sense to me. Like there was this website that I found years ago. I can't remember what it was, but it's basically a gathering of all of the people who were given basically life sentences, either actual life sentences
Yeah,
or virtual life sentences
yeah,
because of the way how
yeah,
old they were when they were
yeah.
sentenced for cannabis.
For
While
cannabis.
people are white people largely are writing business plans and profiting from it. It felt like such a reenactment of the slave era dynamic that it boggled my mind. It absolutely boggled my mind.
It's all mind-boggling when you actually get into it and you start to look at it. And that's still very true today. Here I am on your show talking about the 25 pounds I sold yesterday and having weed all over my house. And some kid in Alabama last night got arrested for selling a dime bag on the
Right.
corner.
Right.
So all of that is the absurdity, and we need to fix that. We need to fix that immediately. We need to fix that right away. However, the new part that we're getting messed up on right now is we are not a part of this industry. And
Right.
this industry is ripe with monopolies, antitrust, and nobody is willing to take it on because the big guys have paid off so many politicians. When you
Mm.
ask yourself, why can't we even get a legal banking bill through? So
Right.
we're selling, as you know, this is a billion-dollar industry. New York, California, Illinois. I mean, everybody is selling weed right now, and I can't have a bank account that doesn't cost me less than $30,000 a year.
Why? There's so many regulators of color who have been calling for this. Not having an effective banking structure impacts everyone in the industry, or does it? And does it impact everyone in the industry equally?
No, it messes up everybody in the industry. Just understand the big guys just have a much longer runway that they can keep playing this
Huh.
ridiculous game because, Curaleaf made over $1 billion in sales last year. Now, granted, they had some
Damn.
phenomenal loss of some ridiculous business amount because the current situation that we exist under, this 280E tax penalty that we exist under and treated like Pablo Escobar in the eyes of the IRS
Mm.
ensures that there is no profit left in any business. So whether you're a $1 billion Curaleaf or you're a, $2 million, 20 or $3 million Simply Pure, it doesn't matter, right? It's affecting your bottom line in the same way. It's just the level of runway that you have my runway is much shorter than that of someone who made
Yeah.
$1 billion last year.
So they think they can outlast this lack of regulation and just hang in there long
This
enough.
lack of regulation, and this regulation also prevents us from being a part of this industry. If we
Whew.
can't go to a
Okay.
bank, that
Right.
means that every one of our businesses has to be funded by somebody, a VC, a business, a human being. Can you call your parents and ask them for $5 million?
I mean, we
How
could
about
go.
an auntie, an uncle? You got somebody, right?
You
That
could
you can
lower
call.
that denomination by a lot, and the answer would still be no. The answer would still
And
be
this,
no.
and this is the problem. I can't go to a bank and get a loan to grow my business. I have to rely on mostly some white guy giving me money. And
Mm.
that white guy is going to want a ridiculous amount of my business, control of my business, because I can't go to a bank.
Yeah. It feels like getting pimped in some ways. I've been speaking with a number of folks who they got licenses. They got the license, highly sought after license. They did the work, they did the compliance, they submitted the application, they got the lawyer reviews, they paid the fees, they got the license, and have been stuck to the point where we had a guest who was talking about the
Yep,
fact that some licenses may have to now be returned, and
yep,
those were social equity licenses. And
yep.
folks, if you're listening to this segment for the first time, having a social equity component of the licensure structure of the cannabis legalization in your state might be the difference between people from our communities, the communities that were most harmed by the war on drugs, actually having an opportunity to kind of compete against the big boys and the big billionaires and the bros who are basically running the industry right now. But when you have done the work of securing a license and then you don't have the ability to engage in banking, you can't get a loan, you have to either sell so many shares of that license and bring on so many partners that you essentially become a minority partner in your own enterprise, continuing the pimpology of what has happened to our communities. Am I missing something there?
You just laid it out, and you nailed it. And let me say this to you, there's not a social equity program in the United States right now that's working the way that it should.
Come
Not
on.
one. Not
That's
one,
right.
not one anywhere. And two, as we go into January 20th under this new administration, I'm
Mm.
pretty sure that social equity will be outlawed. So, yeah, here we are.
Oh, right. Because, okay, so let's sit in that space for a minute because we just played a clip from Representative Summer Lee, who is doing God's work in Congress. Between she and Jasmine Crockett, they both give me life. But the reality is,
Right?
like, when I'm not on these
Right.
airwaves, I run a law center, and it's a racial justice law center. We were founded in the 80s to explicitly advocate on behalf of Black people. Black New Yorkers, specifically, explicitly, unabashedly Black and empowered. However, I have had my elders, some of whom helped to found us, who are like, so you're going to have to take Black out the mission, right?
Yep.
You're going to have, now you're going to do the
Yep.
work, but you're going to
Yep.
have to talk about
Yep.
traditionally underserved communities because this attack on equity, social equity, cultural
Hmm.
equity, and beyond is such that anything that is intended to remedy the
Hmm.
disparities that were created as a result of a white supremacist distribution of political power and resources is now
Hmm.
going to be
Hmm.
illegal. And
Yep.
so,
Yep.
but I had not thought about the impact that would
Yep.
have in the cannabis industry. What are cannabis participants of color, the Black ones in particular, of color, yes, but the Black ones, what conversations are you all having about how you're going to adjust to that new reality?
Just before the election, there were 6 amazing cannabis professionals that came together, and we've called ourselves the Cannabis Vanguard. Now, these six professionals happen to be Black women. And Roz McCarthy of Minorities for Medical Marijuana, Gia Marone of GVM Communications Enterprises,
Oh,
uh, Toy Hutchinson, former state senator in Chicago, and the first state czar, drug czar put into play, or cannabis czar put into place. Linda Mercado Green, who owns a anacaustics dispensary in DC, and myself, and we wanted to advise the next administration on
mm,
how to make this industry equitable and the things that needs to have happen to make business work for the business owners, the patients, the customers, and the new vendors coming in.
wow.
Um, since the election, what we have seen is all of the white men who are now clamoring to advise this next president. Um, this administration is not interested in hearing from folks who look like
Mm,
us.
right.
So we're trying to figure out what we need to do next to be able to protect where we're at and to not even be sued for the idea of having too many Black and Latino people coming through the pipelines that were set
Yeah.
up for what was done, for the harms that were done during the drug war to the communities of color.
Wow.
So it's
Mm,
we're all at a loss right now.
yeah.
And so we're trying to figure it out, and we have to figure it out. But let me say this, at the point where Black people learn to stick together the way that white men stick together, we
Come
will
on.
do ourselves a huge favor. And instead of tearing down the Black folks in politics and the places that she tried to get us, we need to see right now white men sticking together to get a pedophile in charge of
Mm.
the law enforcement here in the United States, and they are
Whew.
not missing a beat on it. Let that be
Right.
a lesson to us, but that has nothing to do with weed. I'm sorry.